Veep returned to HBO for its 5th season premiere. The show is known for its foul-mouthed spin on life in the White House. Back on TV right when the real-life U.S. presidential election is in full swing. Stephen, you wrote a piece on the premiere of Veep for Esquire. The prime question being, which is more crazy, satire or reality? And that's what I want to ask you.
Well, yeah, because, Philip Roth said about 50 years ago, he said, you can't write political satire in America anymore because reality just keeps catching up to it. So I figure we've got 10 weeks of the election, we've got 10 weeks of Veep. Let's actually test this theory out. Right. Let's see how this works. And this week, you had thousands and thousands of words spilt about Hillary Clinton using hot sauce. She said, "What do you always have in my purse?"
Someone asked her, "What do you always have in your purse?"
And it just blew up. I mean, it was just like, and so I will tell you that nothing on Veep was that ridiculous.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
This week, reality won. Reality won this week. Reality was weirder than satire this week. Veep is fabulous. It's a wonderful show. But, you could not put Donald Trump in a fictional show. No one would believe it. No one would believe it.
I think the Veep is really instructive in, when Hillary does something, says, I always keep hot sauce in my bag, and the pander is just so ridiculous, and you think, how did somebody on her team not say to her, just don't say that? Or, I was thinking, there's the new Anthony Weiner documentary coming out, and I was thinking, how did it happen that man was tweeting those pictures of himself out in the world? And I think with Veep, you actually understand it a bit more because you see that, that people behind, I actually think that it's actually very astute about the people behind the scenes who screw up constantly, who are always behind the 8 ball, who don't know what they're doing. They move from crisis to crisis to crisis. And I think the show is, I think it did start out as a satire and kind of a vulgar satire, but I actually think it's very astute at kind of getting at what actually happens behind the scenes.
It makes me wonder what it's like for those, behind the scenes of Veep. The work assigned for the writers and creators of that show to stay ahead of and be able to satirize. How do you satirize, as you say, the biggest satire itself?
It's very hard. I don't think, they came from Britain. It was the British team who did The Thick of It, which is one of the greatest political satires of all time. One of my probably my favorite television show of all time. And so they were, and British politics, of course, is just totally absurd. But at least with British politics, there's more intelligence to it than you find in the American political campaign, which is just endless. Yeah. Just this endless series of non-stories, right? It wasn't so much the hot sauce incident with Hillary Clinton. It was just there's a 3,000-word think piece about it in The Atlantic. America has real problems. They have legitimate crises out there. Talk about policy or something. Throw some numbers around, not this endless amount of analysis on the most minute questions of political life.
What do we think of how Selena is portrayed? The show imagines a woman in high political office, a woman who is also super flawed. Rachel, what do you make of her character and how that woman in power is portrayed?
It's quite interesting because that clip off the top, she did have this pimple blowing up on her face. And so, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, because she comes with such goodwill, I feel from all the TV work she did from, Seinfeld and Old Christine, that even though she plays an obnoxious character, that you sort of are with her because Julia Louis-Dreyfus is so good at playing the role. And she's okay to be ugly and not likable and, in your face. And she's also a very vital, sexy woman in her 50s who gets to have a sex life. She's a woman in power who has a very high libido. And I think that's actually, of all the sort of the stuff on the show with the coarse language and all of that, probably the most subversive thing to me is that she is a single woman who is president, who is getting booty calls from, her various boyfriends, and she's a woman in her 50s. And I think that is a remarkably interesting and subversive take on female power.
I saw where she described her character as, or I read where she described her character as both powerful and powerless. And I was really interested in what that means and kind of thinking about what that means for a woman in power to understand herself as powerful and powerless.
How do you, Naila, what impact do you think that fictional women in power have on the way we see women in real life politics?
I think it's important that she's flawed. and that she is, it makes me think of the glass ceiling, like this notion of the professional woman who's attempting to kind of be at the top of her profession or to move up her profession, and then we have this kind of infuriating imagery of the notion that it's the glass ceiling that prevents the woman. We're busy working, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, we hit our heads against this thing that we just hadn't been smart enough to realize was there all along. And there's something really kind of problematic about that, and it makes me think of the psychology professor Alice Eagley, who says that, it's not a glass ceiling, it's a labyrinth. That when women are trying to occupy and hold positions of power, that we're constantly kind of advancing, hitting a wall, moving to the right, moving to the left, having to back up and trying to advance again, trying to find our way to the center. And so I think that showing those flaws and having and kind of exploring the ways in which that power and powerlessness are experienced makes me think of the labyrinth. It makes me think of a more productive way of really of kind of dramatizing what it means to attempt to be a woman and to move and to be professional.